Hi, my name is Henry Glossick. I am the owner of Al's Bicycles here in Edmond, and I've owned the store for 35 years. We are here today to tell you how to adjust your front and rear derailleur.
Welcome to the Bike Summit, folks. This is bicycle enthusiasts. My name is Jeff Keith. I'm with Al's Bicycles here in Edmond, Oklahoma. I'm a certified mechanic of several years. Been in this business since 1987. Today we're going to talk about some simple concepts with our ABCs, our checking of the bike before we go on a roll, and predominantly we're going to focus on the actual derailleurs and how to do basic adjustments, and perhaps look at some troubleshooting areas that are common problems with derailleur systems that can be easily assessed and addressed as needed. So what we'll start with is a simple concept that goes back to any bicycle ride we take. We always want to make sure that our bicycle is ready to go from the beginning, so that we're not surprised on the ride with not having our tires inflated properly, or having our brakes dragging on us, for example. So the ABCs is pretty simple. It's just air, brake, and chain. When I refer to chain, I'm referring to anything that's part of the drivetrain that can touch all the way up into our shifters. But our primary focus is to make sure that we're properly inflated, that our brakes are properly working and clearing and returning back open. When we hit the brake, we want it to make sure that it springs back open and is not dragging. And then finally the chain, which includes potentially rear derailleur, front derailleur, shifting, etc. We're going to take a look at some basic concepts here. So first and foremost, your tires. The air part of the ABC comes down to tire inflation primarily. With tire inflation, most bicycle tires these days will give you all tires these days will give you a recommended inflation. So you may not be able to see this on the camera as we're set right now, but we do actually have a maximum inflation pressure on this tire of 70 psi. Now you might be saying, wow, that's a road bike. That's really low pressure. Whenever in years past when I rode, we used to run 120 psi in a tire. Well, today's modern day tires on a lot of road bikes and mountain bikes, etc., have gotten wider, and by doing so, we have more contact patch on the ground. In doing that, we now can reduce our tire pressure and get much better rolling compliance, comfort, etc. out of a wider tire. With these, so these are going to be maximum 70 psi. We want to make sure that we have with us the capability of being able to inflate. This is a common Presta valve. Presta valves do require an adapter that can thread right onto here if you're dealing with a common car tire pump, the Schrader valve type pump. But this is a manually opened and closed valve, and these allow for higher pressures and for less leakage in general. So we want to make sure that we bring our tire pressures. Every time I ride my bicycle, I take it to the correct pressure from the beginning of the ride before I go ride. So once we've addressed that, we can also make sure that as part of the wheel, that our wheel appears to be spinning freely, appears to be spinning pretty straight. If you notice, I'm kind of putting my finger next to this wheel at the frame, and it's just kind of giving me an indication of how close that wheel, that rim, is coming to my finger as I spin it, to give me an indication if I'm really out of round side to side, up and down. If we do have a scenario where we have issues going on where that wheel is really out of true, then it's recommended bring your bicycle in. We can adjust your spokes at the nipples in order to be able to straighten that wheel out and do a full truing on there, using the proper equipment to do it. Some folks choose to maintain that on your own, and we're more than happy to sell you spoke wrenches as well.
So Jeff, you talked about a Presta valve. Is there another type of valve that you might see on a bicycle?
So a common valve is still the Schrader valve, which is still the common car tire valve. So oftentimes these pumps that we see these days are also designed so that they can work with both Schrader Presta valve in this case and Schrader valve without having an adapter. But it's never a bad idea to have the actual adapter. Right now I just have a cap on this. There is no adapter in this equation. But a simple little adapter can allow us to adapt from this Presta valve to that common car tire Schrader valve size. So it's nice to just keep one on your bike with you at all times. So just in case you even have to stop at the local filling station, gas station, in order to top off real quick if you're in a pinch, you can do that with the adapter and just keep it on your bike with you when you ride.
Thanks.
As part of that air check also, I'm also going to just kind of give my tires a cursory glance to make sure that I don't see any major cuts going on, any debris that has gotten stuck in there that could potentially go deeper and cause a flat. So I'm just giving it a general check, looking to make sure we're not dry rotted, etc. Next, we want to focus on are the brakes. Modern day brakes, oftentimes even on these road bikes, you're seeing disc brakes being utilized. In the past, a lot of bikes will still maintain. There are some bikes that still out there made that utilize a brake that's going to grab the wheel at the rim and stop up here. This happens to be a disc brake. What I'm looking for with either type of style is the ability to spin that wheel freely and check to make sure that I have no rubbing going on. That in this case we have a mechanical disc brake, which you can actually physically see the movement of the armature when I engage that brake. We can actually see that physically moving. It's being pulled by a cable, and I can make sure that again it can spin freely, no rub. With other types of disc brakes, they're hydraulic in nature. With a hydraulic disc brake, it's going to be self-adjusting, so that as my brake pads wear, just like your car, this hydraulic system will self-adjust so that you keep optimum brake stroke and reach throughout the life of the pad. With those, there is going to be, you will not see an external cable of any type, internal cable, any kind of movement going on here. And if we do have a scenario where something goes wrong with the actual line, again, that's a hydraulic line. It needs to be bled properly to get the proper vacuum, etc. But it's one of the best things that can be done as a routine maintenance, especially on disc brakes these days, is if you have a compressor at home and you can blow air and actually clear out the debris, etc., by blowing out the drivetrain, the brakes, etc. That'll save a lot of wear and tear for sure. One thing we need to be very aware of is anytime we're adjusting anything going on with our gears and the drivetrain, the derailleur, etc., we want to make sure that if we're ever using lubricants, we're not overspraying the lubricants onto our disc brake rotors, into our caliper, etc. That can contaminate things and cause big problems. So from there, we can check both front and rear air and brakes, etc. Just make sure everything is moving smoothly and you're getting proper braking tension, etc. From there, we can go ahead and dive into the drivetrain, which is the primary focus of what we're talking about today. With the drivetrain, what we include in the drivetrain would be the cranks, the chain, the rear derailleur, the front derailleur in this case. This bike does have a front derailleur as well. And then we have the shifters, and those will be oftentimes on a typical road bike. They're going to be integrated into the brake levers that we see here. If I want to pull the brake, but if I want to shift the gears, I actually move these paddles in an inward stroke. So whenever we set up a modern day derailleur gear system, it's very important to know when it's time to replace parts, etc., exactly how many gears we have in the back. That determines the width of the chain that's utilized in the equation. Trying to use an 11-speed chain, 11 gears in the back on a 7-speed rear end is not going to be beneficial. It's not going to make you any lighter, faster, and it's not going to work properly. So what we look at primarily when it comes to the actual derailleur and drivetrain train adjustments is based on limitations. So we literally have screws and or bolts, we'll call them, that are designed so that they limit how far these derailleurs can actually sweep inward and outward. Generally speaking, most derailleur adjustments do not require much adjustment on these, what we call limit screws. They will generally be marked high and low, H and L. And again, that limits how far we can go inward or outward with the sweep of the derailleur itself as it's moving the chain from cog to cog. However, if they, as time goes on and if they do begin to wear over time, then there can be some adjustment that would be required. So that gives us our access point center and out. We also have a limit screw that's called a B limit screw. This limits how far the derailleur can sweep fore and aft on the fore and aft axis. Again, this is not these three screws are not commonly adjusted nearly as often as the primary tension barrel adjuster that we have. This barrel adjuster here is actually designed so that I can adjust it. It is threaded in this case, and I can adjust it to increase or decrease the amount of tension on the cable that is actually passing through this housing. So if I put more tension on this cable, it makes the derailleur want to go in towards the center line and engage the next bigger cog. If I release tension out of it, it allows it to relax and want to fall back in the direction of the smaller cog. Most common derailleur systems these days that are designed on a indexed system where the shifter has actual indexed points of shift points that allow this chain to only go so far. When we want to adjust our cable tension, most of these systems are designed so that they will be adjusted from the second smallest cog that happens to be the second highest gear in the back cluster. So what I do to check my tension, first and foremost, I'm going based at this point on the fact that I have my limit screws already preset. And again, it's not a super common adjustment that's required often. When we do adjust the primary things that we do adjust with the cable tensioning, that's going to eliminate the majority of problems that we have with shifting wanting to be erratic or inconsistent. So I'm going to shift this as I pedal forward. I'm going to shift this to the second cog, second smallest cog, again, second highest gear. And my primary focus is to listen and look to see what the chain is actually doing in that second cog. Is it fluttering back and forth? Is it making excessive noise? I'm going to purposely put some adjustment on this by adding tension. In this case, I'm going to turn this barrel counterclockwise, looking at it from the top. And as I add more tension, I'm purposely adding quite a bit here so that you can hear right away. Now we have a clicky chain. It's wanting to engage gear number, we'll say this is actually gear number 8 out of 10, but it's wanting to jump up to that third cog. If I back that off a little bit, it's not going to want to jump. It'll jump back down to 2. It's still a little clicky. And again, here we're going as much by sight as sound. What I can do is I can actually physically adjust that adjustment barrel while I'm pedaling in my stand, and I can force it to go the completely opposite way where it wants to engage the smallest cog. Now it's too far out this way and it's trying to engage this first or smallest high cog. So when I adjust that in that position number 2, again I'm adding some cable tension, and I'm looking at this trying to get it so that this cog that this chain is running on is going to be in as direct line with these 2 pulleys. So again, I'm going to purposely overdo it. You'll start to hear it and see it. There it goes. It wanted to engage that next cog. It went right away. Not making a lot of noise, but went pretty easy. So we're trying to split the difference between that high and low side of the equation so that it's not trying to engage either the next smaller or the next bigger when I'm in that second position on the shifter. So from there, I can then click it one at a time and advance it through to the bigger cogs. And now we can see that we've managed to sweep through all the cogs, and we are in very close to the correct position. We may not be exact, but we're very close. And then I can also look at, while I'm in this bigger cog, kind of transitioning back and forth, I can look at my range on this, the distance on this axis, which again would be, if I wanted to adjust that, I would adjust it at the B screw. The key to the B screw is primarily making sure that we have enough chain wrapping around the cog and engaging as many teeth on the bottom side of any of these cogs as possible without having it so wrapped around that it wants to actually engage tooth to tooth. You'll actually hear it get crunchy in a way. It'll definitely hesitate. So, for example, I can take, in this case, my Phillips head screwdriver. This is a very finicky screw if you're not careful. It has a very shallow head to it, and it's easy to accidentally strip. So what I find is, if I ever want to play with that B screw adjustment, I'm going to actually take this back down to a smaller cog, and I'm going to physically manipulate that derailleur straight back like so. Now I have eliminated any tension that I have on this B limit screw before I start trying to twist it and potentially strip this out. If I take pressure off of it, it makes it easier to then come in here and carefully make the adjustment. So in this case, I'm going to back that B screw all the way off just to kind of show you what we should get here when I start going into our low cogs, which are our big gears. Once I start getting to here, if that B screw has too much wrap going on with it, it will have a tendency to make more noise trying to jump up there, and we'll get some crossover where there's not enough gap between the cogs that we see here, the upper pulley and the big cog. This one's not too bad, and again, I've got quite a bit of adjustment that I can play with on this one, being a new bike. But if it wants to grind and hesitate going to these biggest of the cogs here, then we know we may need to back off, create some more space here. In order to create more space between those, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this out. In this case, I'm going to turn this B limit screw clockwise. By driving the B limit screw in deeper, it's pushing pulling the derailleur back on this axis. The more that drives in there, goes deeper, it will pull that straight back. So again, not commonly adjusted nearly as often as cable tension predominantly. As things wear, if it's obvious that, let me take my low here and we're going to back it off a little bit. Now I'm going to do this very carefully because the last thing I want to do is allow this derailleur to dive too deep towards the spokes and get caught up and wrapped up. It's a common thing that we see if things get out of whack there. You can see how I can physically move this now that I've backed off that limit screw in order to show you what it could potentially do. Now you can see that chain is wanting to engage and jump off to the inside. That's why the spoke protector is there, to keep that chain from being able to potentially damage as many spokes, etc. So you can see by what I did just now, I purposely over adjusted it so that you can see this would not be a good thing. This could end up jamming up a drivetrain very quickly. So I'm going to carefully rotate this back out in this case. And again, going to my L for low, because I'm in the low cog, which is the big cog. We're going to adjust that limit screw in till I actually feel it start to engage. You'll feel it engage where it wants to limit that chain from going any further inward. And now I can physically even begin to make it move, where you might be able to pick that up on the camera, where now it's not going to allow it to. Let's see here, let's take this one down. So now it's engaging back up there. If I go way in there with that limit screw, I can keep that from going up into that big cog. Yeah, I just clicked it and it will not engage the big cog. Which might be a trick that from time to time may be something that comes in handy out on the road. If we know that something has happened where we have physically bent something going on here, and this derailleur is trying to get too close to the spokes, with a simple tool, we can adjust that so that I could limit this so that there's no chance it would ever go in too far in an emergency situation on the road. And then know that I would need to readjust everything out once we get home.
Jeff, I've had a situation where my cable broke, and so I was able to adjust it so that it was more of an intermediate.
Right. So in that case, what you would do is you would typically lock it out so that the high would only allow it to go back down and relax so far. Because when I'm going towards high gears, I'm actually taking tension out of the cable. When I'm going to low gears, big cogs, I'm actually increasing this cable tension. So in order to keep it from relaxing all the way down to where you would have been in high gear stuck there, you likely adjusted it so that you were probably in third, fourth, fifth, somewhere through the middle here to be able to get home. So yeah, that's since I've kind of tested this, I'm going to back this low limit screw back off so that, and I'm feeling it as I do it. I can actually feel that relaxing that derailleur, wanting to relax that tension that I put in there out. And now I can go back and I can test once again. Am I engaging? Yes. There's a little bit of that hop. There's that B limit screw coming in now. You can see and hear some chunkiness going on right here, where it's these two are too close to each other. So while I'm right here anyway, I'm going to go ahead and adjust some of that B limit screw back into it. I'm going to roll this back to take tension off of it, and now add some B limit. And now I can spin it again. Still a little chunky. Part of the chunkiness that I'm getting is also from the front derailleur rub. But again, relax it, adjust it. So one of the things to be super careful about is to make sure that, keep in mind what I was just doing to kind of illustrate our limit screw capabilities. I was turning a lot of limit screw into that to do that. I was overemphasizing in this case. Whenever you're adjusting for true adjustment and not trying to show it as an example, we're only going to make very, very minor adjustments on this. Typically speaking, if we're in the right ballpark with the limit screw to begin with, a minor change like a quarter turn to a half turn can make a huge difference. These adjustments are rarely done. That things can wear over time, and they do need to be readjusted over time accordingly as things begin to break in, etc. But where these can come in handy is just in the example that you said, well, just a second ago, was that, you know, maybe we have a scenario where something else has gone wrong that's not fixable on the road. Now we need to do more limiting. The other thing that people get into that I see the big common mistakes is people trying to adjust on their own. They start adjusting here before they ever mess with anything cable-wise, and potentially a big problem that we see is that things can get bent up and knocked out of alignment. So you can try to adjust till you're blue in the face and get it to a point where you can limit how far it throws, but it's never going to hit the gears with authority throughout the entire range. And no matter where it is in the range, if it's not hitting the gear correctly and staying in its proper place, if we dump a chain at the, you know, standing up out of the saddle, going to pedal hard up a hill, if things come off, it will surprise us and it'll put us on the ground, which is not good. So keep in mind that part of what we are looking at, I'm looking more at two things than anything else, is cable adjustment and alignment. What the angles look like on this pulley armature. If this gets knocked over in just the right way, at a rest stop or whatever it may be, in your own garage, if it lands on this derailleur in the right way and bends one of these, this is a replaceable derailleur hanger here, it's meant to bend and break away before you bend and break your frame. So if this gets knocked out of alignment, you can try to adjust all this all you want, and it's never going to be correct. So that's something that some riders choose to actually carry with them as part of their kit for roadside maintenance, a spare backup derailleur hanger, because once these bend, it can be very difficult to get them to bend back and keep their strength and not want to break immediately, you know, break right away. So it's not uncommon to see people carry the rear derailleur hanger as a replacement just in case. But one of the best tests that you can give on a bike also when it's up in the stand, just to kind of see what's going on here, is to actually spin it backwards and listen to it. Now right now I'm getting a little bit of some noise from the front end of the equation here on this little sticker that they put on from when the bike is new. But if we spin that backwards now we can kind of listen. And if I, again, this is me doing this purposely to kind of illustrate how much variance we can have. If I spin this wheel backwards and I start adjusting, let me go this way, probably is easiest. If I start really putting a lot of a barrel adjustment in there, now you can see it really sounds like it wants to jump. Just by turning that a little bit, it's already cleaned up. Now again, this is just for illustrative purposes. But again, once we know that we're good on our limit screws, so that derailleur cannot go any further in towards the spokes. And I was doing that manually. And we know that we have good alignment on the high end. Again, I can spin this and I can literally go to the high screw. It's probably got too much cable tension. It won't. So if I back that high screw out, it's making it want to come towards me, towards the away from the center line. And if we go too far with that and we relax cable tension, what can happen is now this chain wants to jump in between the cog and the frame itself. So again, I can also go the opposite direction and make it want to jump up into the second cog. That was me putting too much limit screw, so now I have limited so it won't come down all the way to here. Now I'm going to back that back off, let it fall into the high gear, and then at that point kind of adjust and listen to it. It's kind of a listen, feel, look all together at the same time. And again, if the camera weren't here, then I could step around on the back side of this and also take a look at the physical alignment to make sure that I'm drawing a pretty straight line through here.
Jeff, is the barrel adjustment is always in the back, or do you sometimes see it on the handlebars?
It's more common to see it in the rear on Shimano equipment. There are some brands that they choose to put it absolutely up at the shifter. In traditional road bikes, we also used to have a lot of exposed cable, where instead of running this internal routing that they've done here on the front end, you would also have a barrel adjuster here that could be adjusted on the fly carefully. Yes. But generally speaking, most derailleur systems, your more common place to look is right at the rear of the rear derailleur.
Is there a estimated life expectancy of the cable itself?
So you should be able to typically get a couple seasons, a couple years out of a cable in most cases. And of course, just like anything else, so much of it comes down to how clean, how lubricated we keep things. And a general wipe down with a rag goes a lot farther than trying to douse these things in utilizing high pressure water, etc. You don't take it to the car wash. We don't recommend that because you're going to force water into bearings that are going to cause bigger problems. But that said, keeping these things clean and grunge free makes a big difference if we can do it. Another little handy trick here, real quick, that you don't necessarily always have this on all bikes, but because this cable, we notice that it is an externally routed cable where I can see it's not going through the frame but being externally routed outside the frame. Watch what happens if I take this guy and I shift it all the way to the low gear. Okay, so I've advanced that cable. I've put as much tension in this cable as possible. Now, this is the exception to the rule where people will tell you don't shift unless you're pedaling. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually shift the opposite way without pedaling in order to relax the cable tension out of the equation as much as possible. So the derailleur is going to physically hold the chain in place by not advancing the pedal. And notice I can back all that tension out of that cable. What that allows me to do at this point is then to come in here and pull the cable housing free from the cable stop that is here. That's nice because then I can then pull my cable free, wipe it, lubricate it if I want, but I can also check for what we call harpooning. Most cables straight from the factory will have a little bit of a harpoon effect to it. You can see the silver strands coming through. As time goes on and we've shifted and it's relaxed and put all that tension in that cable and housing, this outer nylon will actually begin to peel back some. And the more that harpoons, the more it begins to affect the shifting. So by being able to relax that cable tension out of the equation here, I was able to take the cable out where I can physically inspect that. Again, there are a lot of bikes these days that do not utilize any sort of external routing like we see here. Instead, they now oftentimes will go with fully internally routed systems, and it makes it a little more difficult to do that kind of stuff. But with these old external routed style, it makes it very cool for being able to kind of assess what's going on. So now that I still have cable tension relaxed out of it, I can put that cable housing back into the cable stop, and I'm going to either shift it back to where it is supposed to be, or even if this is relaxed and the cable tension's out, I can go ahead and just advance the pedal, and it allowed it to go back to its position that I had left it in. But that's a great way to be able to inspect, especially, like I say, on externally routed cable housing concepts like this. Again, the B limit screw, not going to be commonly adjusted, but can be quite beneficial if your shifting seems to want to hesitate. It's not uncommon to see bikes come in where somebody has tried to adjust this and they've overdone it and they've pulled this way back by adjusting it to its maximum, thinking they need to tighten that down because they see threads there, and so as a result of that, it'll get cinched down, and then by not having full wrap of the chain around the cog, it's going to drastically slow down. It will especially slow down shifting going from a big cog and coming back down towards the small high cogs. The more this chain can wrap around that cassette, the better it will shift in both directions. But again, the limitation is we don't want it so close that it's going to actually rub cog to cog once we get into that big ring, those big cogs. So again, at this point, now we've kind of coming full circle back. We have our limit screws set. We have our so that we know that we're not going in too far to the spokes. We're not wanting to shift off too far on the inside of the frame here. And so then at that point, once I know I've got my limit screws set, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in high gear, advance it to the second highest gear, set my cable tension. Again, I can do this by feel / sound / sight. And you guys may pick up on that, a little bit of rub off this brake too. It's a little off center, but so if you're picking up that noise, that's what that is. But now as I click through, I can make sure that I'm engaging every cog cleanly, and that I'm not hearing any unusual sounds, or it feels like maybe it wants to go a half shift or something. If that's the case, if it doesn't feel like it's fully engaging every cog as we come up through the cogs here, then we know that we've got some issues going on potentially with alignment of the derailleur itself. Oftentimes, if this gets out of alignment, what will tend to happen is I will get several really good shifts through the lower cog, or the high cogs, which are the smaller cogs, and then as I start to work where it's putting far more tension on the derailleur system, as we start working towards the middle, it'll really start to be more noticeably out of alignment, and you'll hear and feel that. And again, if it seems to be where it gets worse as it goes, then that's usually an indication of improper alignment here, which again, specialty tools shops, we do carry a specialty tool that's designed to try to straighten this out. If not, this derailleur hanger would likely need to be replaced. When things get bent up, if things get knocked around in the right way, not only can we have bending going on here where it's supposed to bend and break away, but sometimes we can have it down in the lower portion of it. Things can get twisted. So we want to be really aware of that nice line as we look at it from the backside. And you'll really see it best when we're in kind of the middle cogs here. That gives me my best indication of what the alignment is in general, whether it's twisted or angled out, etc. So from there, then we kind of start to focus on the front derailleur. All right, so moving on to the front derailleur. Here we have, generally speaking, we're going to have either 2 or 3 gears on the front. And so in this case, the more common nowadays is the double compared to the triple, especially on road bikes like we see here. Basically, again, we have a system, in this case with modern day derailleurs, where we have indexing going on, where there are certain spots where the shifter is telling the derailleur to be in as we go through the different alignment from the rear of the equation. So just as a quick example, I'm going to shift some rear cog, shift around on the rear cog a little bit here, and you're going to see the proximity that chain comes within the plates, the inner and the outer plate on this front derailleur. And you'll see kind of what we're primarily adjusting for. So every now and again, as I spin there, you're hearing a little bit of chain rub going on. Now we are in what we call small to small, which is high gear, low gear on the front. This is actually what we've all commonly called a bad cross. It's basically at this point the chain is as far out from the center line as it possibly can be in the rear, and it's as far in from to the closest to the center line on the front. That's a bad cross. We want to try to avoid those gears for the most part. Generally speaking, if I'm trying to find something that's in that same range, I can go kind of middle to big, and it will give me that same basic gear range. But this gives me an indication that what they've done with the modern day bikes is they've actually got more than one setting on the derailleur. So I have low, I have high, but I also have a minor detent or a trim. You can see that it's just barely moving that derailleur. So now, the whole idea with that is as I shift in the back and it throws that angle to a different position by going to a bigger cog, it's going to want to start rubbing on the inside. Now again, what they're doing that is to try to give you, even with bad crosses, some usability. So here we go, we're getting very close to we're almost to the biggest cog in the back, and we're now can trim. Oops, I went too many. There it wants to rub. You can hear it rub, and now the rub is gone. That's our trim on the front. When I hit it down again to small cog in the front, or small chainring in the front, there's two positions there. You can see slightest amount of change in order to accommodate the varying angles that are coming from the rear of the bike. That's always been a very difficult adjustment to keep adjusted over the years, and because this derailleur is making a very big sweep from the smallest cog to the smallest chainring to the biggest chainring, where in the rear we're making very minor jumps. Oftentimes the indexing is easier to maintain on the rear than it is on the front. So depending on the derailleur, there are a few tricks that can be done for actual setup that can accommodate and make this trim setup easier. What I will tell you for now is, again, once it's set up from the beginning, from when you pick it up from the bike shop, it should be set with its limit screws correctly set. Again, I've got a high and a low limit screw, just like we did on the rear derailleur. That limits how far it allows that derailleur to go inward towards the center line or outward away from the center line. Again, not adjusted as often, but in this case, we've noticed that there is no cable tension barrel adjuster in this equation back here at the derailleur. Where they've placed it is actually up front here on the cable housing itself. This is a split cable housing, and it allows me to adjust more or less tension into this. The big thing to keep in mind really when it comes to adjusting that cable tension is that because this is making big sweeps and because these angles are so extreme front to back in certain gear ratios, with the modern day derailleur, there's almost always going to be guaranteed some amount of rub at some point on that derailleur that you just can't get around. As a matter of fact, Shimano has done in this particular case on this particular front derailleur. They put a nylon spacer, if you will, or a guide inside the guide, and it's designed actually to take that rub that we know is going to be there at some point, and when we're in low and low, and it will keep it from wearing out that chain and derailleur. It's meant to actually be a bit of a guide that actually touches the chain in the most extreme position. So when we deal with front derailleurs, less likely to get knocked out of alignment because of an impact. If we see an impact, a bike falls over in just the right way in the garage, wherever it may be, we're more likely to impact and affect the alignment here. More often than not, if alignment goes bad on a front derailleur, it's in all likelihood something where it just wasn't clamped to the right tension. In all likelihood, they should not be allowed to. It's going to take a big hit to really knock this front derailleur out of place. But that said, height of the derailleur and angle of the derailleur relative to the chainring is huge. And generally speaking, if I'm trying to adjust my actual angle of the front derailleur, I'm trying to align the inner plate with the chainring and square the inner plate to the chainring itself. It can be deceptive because these manufacturers put some really unusual bends oftentimes in these derailleur plates. And it looks, even on this brand new one, you look down on this from the correct angle, and it's like, it looks like it's been bent incorrectly from the beginning, but that's actually part of the design. Just like part of the design on the chain rings, you will see that a brand new chain ring, the more advanced it is, the better quality it is, you'll see more variation from tooth to tooth, where these are not symmetrical. They look like, in a lot of cases, like they've been worn unevenly, and it's a wear thing, but it's actually part of the design in order to help this chain ramp on and off of these teeth easier. So don't be fooled by that fact that those are not symmetrical. But that front derailleur, really the big thing is to make sure that we're getting, that those limit screws do not allow it to jump too far down into the frame or too far out, because when things jump off here, things can get out of whack pretty quick. So that's our primary focus, is the limits on this compared to on the rear. Limits are important, but more often than not, it's cable tension. And then with these, again, the modern day front derailleur that we see on a lot of road bikes, it's one of those things that the initial setup of these are very important, and it's very easy to get too little or too much cable tension to where it never wants to engage correctly. And so what we do is, when we set one of these up, we actually purposely load some extra tension into physically holding this derailleur in place like so, with some tension on that chain. Then I set my cable tension on the anchor point here, relax that so it can come back, and then make adjustments at the barrel adjuster, because there is very limited amount of how much adjustment you can get from these barrel adjusters, and if we don't set it right from the beginning, it will just never quite hit right, and you'll get excessive rub. So this one is a little bit more difficult to adjust that tension on. Now, some of the older school, the older design front derailleurs, we don't deal with that nearly as much, but because of the fact that it is using that trim that I speak of, it's the trim adjustment that makes it so much more difficult to get. And I think that probably the biggest issue that I see is when it comes to the guy on the side of the road trying to adjust, is we've lost cable tension here. The cable has either stretched or slipped, and we just can't get enough barrel adjustment to accommodate on the roadside. And then it becomes having to try to re-anchor the actual cable itself, and that can be difficult. But as long as the parameters are set from initially high and low limit screws set properly from the beginning, and we feel solid there, then minimal adjustments can be made at that barrel adjuster to make major changes. So,
Jeff, this has been very helpful. Can you just briefly talk about maintaining your chain?
So my best friend when it comes to chain maintenance is a simple, clean, dry rag, or clean-ish. You can see I've got a little coffee stains on this one, but a clean, dry rag goes a long, long way in maintaining a chain. What it does is it gives me an indication of how much grit and grime I have on that chain, and I see as many issues with over lubrication as under lubrication. And oftentimes people come in with some of the sloppiest lubricant I ever see. 3-in-1 oil, WD-40 original formulation, those are not oils to be used on a chain. Typically speaking, we want to maintain a chain and keep it lubricated with either a paraffin-based or, in our area, more often than not, what they call a dry lube. It'll be a Teflon-based lube more often than not, and it will go on wet. It will tend to stay wet, but it's designed more for our dry conditions. But if it's obvious that I'm getting really, really grimy stuff coming off of the chain, then I might get after it with an actual chain cleaner, which I can apply to my rag and again run through the rag. I can also take that rag and kind of focus it on the pulleys here carefully, not to get it wound up in the chain, etc. I can knock the grime off there. I can knock the grime off with the rag here. Again, I can use other cleaners. If I'm going to use a cleaner on this and I'm going to keep the stuff on the bike, not actually taking it off to clean it, then I'm going to take my rag and kind of position it behind my derailleur as I'm spraying in here with cleaners, lubricants, etc., so that I'm not overspraying. Overspray is what tends to cause bigger problems with other parts of the bike, especially disc brakes, no question. And then most of the lubricants are done with a simple drip bottle. I prefer that to the aerosol spray myself. I'm not a big fan of aerosol because, again, of overspray issues. But when I do go to actually lubricate the chain, I'm just going to literally let that drip bottle drip lubricant onto the rollers of the chain as I kind of pedal it backwards. I'm just literally touching the tip of that dropper bottle to it. Let it set up, kind of do its thing, and then you might wipe the excess off again. Never hurts again. I prefer a rag and just a little bit of a handheld cleaner to wipe down the rest of my bike, check things out. That gives me the opportunity to look up close and personal to make sure that I'm not seeing any unusual cracking going on with the frame, anything unusual there. The nice part about a lot of these modern day bikes as well is that for cleaning purposes, the modern day two-piece crank is a much easier crank assembly to take apart these days compared to what we used to. Less specialty tools, less frustrating to take apart, so that then I can actually pull these cranks apart and easily get to my bearings in there, wipe those out. Like I say, a clean dry rag, a little bit of a handheld or just a hand-applied cleaner, polish, lubricants, that goes a long way. Overspray is not good.
Jeff, thank you very much. This has been very informative, and I know everybody at the Bike Summit's going to love
Think we'll get it?
what you said.
Think you can put that together?
Absolutely.
If you would like your derailleurs adjusted and you need some tweaking done on it, feel free to come in, mention this ad, and you'll get a 10% off on your labor.